Platform.
Good evening and welcome to the People's Platform. Now, the United Nations Population Fund, or the UNFPA, has been a long-standing and key ally in the development paradigm of Sri Lanka, working collaboratively through the years with government and other key stakeholders in areas ranging from gender equality and reproductive health to disaster response and resilience building to capacity building and policy support. In pursuance of further advancing collaboration and support, I'm so pleased to welcome to Sri Lanka for the first time and to the Newsfirst studio, UNFPA Asia Pacific Regional Director Pio Smith. Good evening and welcome, Pio.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Pio, during this visit, you held discussions with some key policymakers, government officials and other stakeholders. Could you share with us the primary objective of your visit to Sri Lanka and how it aligns with UNFPA's broader goals in the Asia Pacific region?
Well, my visit to Sri Lanka, first and foremost, is about visiting, engaging and discussing with the women and girls that we serve as UNFPA throughout the country, and to listen to them in terms of their needs with respect to sexual and reproductive health, and to understand where is it that we can do better in terms of providing that support to them. And I've been very lucky in terms of the people that I've met throughout these past days and with whom I've engaged, because you get a better understanding of how a lot of what we design at headquarters and in the technical arena, how that comes to life in a real life setting where we're engaging and supporting women and girls on some of the needs that are really important to them, that are life-saving. So first and foremost, it's about them, it's about listening to women and girls, but it's also about renewing our commitment, renewing our commitment to the people of Sri Lanka, to the government of Sri Lanka. I'm very excited because we're 50 years now operating in Sri Lanka, and that's been a very fruitful partnership that we have enjoyed through successive governments. And it takes partnership, and real partnership is also about looking at what the successes are, how you can build those out and get a deeper scale for some of these very complex issues, and also to understand where is it that perhaps we need to refit, where do we need to look at doing things perhaps in a different way, looking at partnering differently also with different stakeholders here in Sri Lanka. Obviously, for UNFPA, our overarching objective is threefold. The first is around providing access to family planning for women and girls in every setting where we work. It's also about working to reduce maternal mortality, and that we can achieve through many different ways, including by working and building the capacity of our midwives. Midwives save lives. And then the third part of our agenda is really around harmful practices, and by that I mean gender-based violence. So how do we root out that scourge that is actually in many, if not all countries of the world, a pervasive scourge and one that in many instances can cause fatality for women and girls who suffer at the hands of their perpetrators. So all of that encompasses what we do as UNFPA, not only in Sri Lanka, but across the region and across the globe. And it's an important opportunity for me to come and to meet with government and to take stock of where we can do better.
Sri Lanka is currently also facing a multidimensional crisis. Speak to us about some of the key strategies or initiatives that you wish to prioritize in order to invest in Sri Lanka's youth.
Well, when you have a crisis and vulnerabilities are exacerbated, very often what we see is that women and girls are the ones who suffer the most. They're always top of the list when it comes to issues that are deprioritized in any response plan. And so we want to make sure that that is avoided at all costs. And so as UNFPA, the Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency, we're working to make sure that we reduce the vulnerabilities that women and girls are exposed to. One of the ways we do that is by increasing the access that they have to sexual and reproductive health care and services. We're doing that through, in rural areas, for example, ensuring that we are able to provide women and girls with what we call our maternal, our dignity kits, our adolescent kits. And essentially these kits are full of essential items that a woman or a girl might need when pregnant or when menstruating, because these things continue even in the midst of a crisis. We're also working to establish one-stop centres throughout the country. Those one-stop centres are aimed at providing a comprehensive response and care package for women and girl survivors of gender-based violence, so that they can go to one place where they can get the care that they need after suffering the trauma of gender-based violence, often from an intimate partner. And rather than having to go around to different providers in the health or the justice or the social sector, we provide all of that in these one-stop centres, so that that woman or that girl gets everything that she needs under one roof, including temporary shelter if that is what is needed. But it's also about getting smarter and more strategic about how we make these response plans in any crisis setting more responsive to gender needs. And so make them more gender sensitive, make them more gender inclusive. And that also means that the budgeting that comes with a lot of these plans has to be done through the lens of what is it that is needed to ensure that all of the population are adequately served. I recognise in a country like Sri Lanka, it's been a painful road for the government to go through the economic recovery and reforms that are needed, and that requires and has required a lot of difficult decisions. And I understand that the government are looking at a whole panoplia of issues that are very urgent for them. And my message to government has been to ensure that as you do that, as you navigate that economic recovery and reform process, that women and girls are not left to the side, that those who bear the brunt of this vulnerability, of this crisis, that they are the ones who we always keep front and centre, because then you get an equitable response to the crisis. And we're very proud and pleased to be working with the government of Sri Lanka, along with many other partners, to make sure that we achieve just that.
Pio, when it comes to matters such as gender-based violence, oftentimes many of the stakeholders adopt a reactive approach as opposed to a preventative approach. How important is it for us to invest in the preventative mechanisms as well?
Sonali, you are spot on. It is so important that we invest in the preventive approach, and there are many ways that we do that. At UNFPA, we're working really hard to make sure that young people understand the negativity that comes with a lot of these, long established patriarchal gender discriminatory norms and practices. And we do that through, among other things, our work on comprehensive sexuality education. Now, comprehensive sexuality education, or CSE in brief, that's not just about teaching kids about sex. It's much, much more than that. It's about teaching full respect for each other. It's about teaching that young girl that she is the one ultimately in charge of her body. She is the one who owns her bodily autonomy, because when she understands that right, she understands when it is appropriate to say no. She understands about her right to a choice of when to have a child, with whom, how many. And so, engaging with youth is so important because on these matters, because that is how you break down a lot of the stereotypes, a lot of the cultural barriers, and you undo a lot of what we've seen is societal discriminatory practices that for time immemorial have haunted women, have haunted girls, and that's why you have GBV. And so it's not just about the response to it, which of course is extremely important as well. The prevention piece is key, and for us, investing in youth, investing in CSE is a key part of that response.
Women's representation and participation in leadership in Sri Lanka remains abysmally low. How important is it for Sri Lanka's 52% to be representative in the legislative arm of government?
Women's participation in the political process is something that is of concern the world over, I must say. I have read the statistics here in Sri Lanka, and as I understand it, there are no female members of cabinet. 5% of the parliament is female, and that in the 100 years of electoral history here in Sri Lanka since the 1930s, it's only ever reached 7%. Clearly that's wrong. Clearly we need to do better. And, you know, the evidence is so abundantly clear. When women are involved in decision making, when women are involved in shaping policies, in enshrining laws, no matter what it is, then ultimately it is better because it serves the entire population. We have seen time and time again that, you know, these often man-made policies, man-made laws, they don't cater fully to 100% of the population. So 52% get left out, particularly when it comes to their needs with respect to sexual and reproductive health, to maternal health care, to these really important, critical issues around the family as well. And so we want to see many more women involved in politics. And there's a role here for many people to play. There's a role for political parties to help create that space, to make sure that there is a minimum threshold in terms of the behaviour that is expected of our politicians, one that is open to to gender inclusivity, one that respects the voices of everybody in Sri Lanka and their right to come to the table and to help shape a Sri Lanka that is for everybody. And so there's a real role that political parties can play. These things take leadership. I feel lucky to have met and engaged with the governor up in Jaffna. A great example of female leadership in politics. And of course, young women, they need to see themselves reflected in politics if they're going to invest in pursuing that as a career. But it's also, so my message to young girls, to young women is don't get discouraged. Use your voice. Use the power that you have. You know what the solutions are. You know how key it is for your involvement in many of these spheres of public life in order to make sure that we have a society that is fully reflective of your needs, but also that is just properly balanced, that is making the right decisions about the country's future. But more than a message to the young women or the young girls of Sri Lanka, I have an even more important message, and it's to the young men and the boys of Sri Lanka. And actually, Sonali, it's to every man in Sri Lanka, old or young, privileged or underprivileged, and everybody in between. Men, it's time to step up. Full stop. It's time to step up. Time is over for this kind of, patriarchy that has for years held women down, held women back from being involved in public life, public decision making, but also in the private sphere. And, that takes real leadership. That takes real leadership to be able to call out instances of gender discrimination, to have enough foresight and confidence in yourself as a man to see that in the workplace, this rule doesn't work for our female colleagues, and we need to change that. So that's what I want to see as Sri Lanka. But it's not just for Sri Lanka, it's actually my own country, Ireland. It's for every country in the world. Men need to do a better job at stepping up and calling out these discriminatory practices that have for too long dominated the discourse.
On that aspirational note, we're going for a short commercial break. We'll be right back.
The People's Platform. Sri Lanka. පාසල් ක්‍රිකට් වංශ කතාවේ අලු බඳුන සුළු හිතයින්ගේ 94වැනි අභිමානවත් සංග්‍රාමයට සියල්ල සූදානම්. මේක තමයි Big Match එක.
For the 94th Battle of the Maroons.
The Bhagavad Gita is a scripture that is scientific and universal, which means it's meant for all humans across the globe.
In-person Bhagavad Gita lecture by Sunandaji on the 2nd to the 6th of March 2024 from 6:45 p.m. to 8 p.m. at the Buddhist Cultural Center near Tomula Junction, Colombo 5. Registration and details vedantacolombo.org or contact 076-279-6113. Media sponsors TV1, Sirasa TV, Shakti TV and News First. TV1. TV for life.
Navy entrusted with safeguarding Sri Lanka's oceanic territory, says President at fleet inspection. Agreement signed for Indian energy projects in 3 islands in the north. Motorcycle gunmen target man in Ahungalla. Police officer apologizes to civilians in court for the 2nd time in 2 weeks.
TV1. TV for life.
The People's Platform.
Welcome back to the People's Platform. I'm in conversation with UNFPA Asia Pacific Regional Director Pio Smith. Pio, shifting gears, speak to us about how the UNFPA integrates climate action into its mandate and what measures the UNFPA is undertaking to mitigate the risks associated with climate change for communities in Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Sonali, for that question, because of course climate change is something that should be of concern to all of us. No matter what our station is in life, it is real and it is happening, and we need to take urgent action now and support the work of the Secretary General in trying to get a broader partnership with more urgent, decisive action to address these challenges. Now, here in the Asia Pacific region, it is an area where there is an acute vulnerability towards climate and climate-induced events. And, you know, as ever, it's women and girls who bear the brunt of these disasters, of these climate-related incidents. And as UNFPA, we're trying to put on the table that, you know, pregnancy doesn't stop just because of a climate change event. Menstruation does not stop because of a climate-induced event. In fact, what we see is that actually women and girls are more exposed to things such as gender-based violence during moments of climate displacement. So we work in some key areas with respect to the climate response. The first is ensuring access, that women and girls continue to have the life-saving access to sexual and reproductive and maternal healthcare needs, and that also they're able to, no matter where they're stationed, no matter where they're located in the country, should it be in the deep rural areas, that we're able to provide facilities that allow for safe birth, that allow for continuity of a provision of postnatal care, and that also the child is safe in those very delicate moments as well. It's also about building our own resilience. So many of the centres and the facilities that we support throughout Sri Lanka, we're working hard to make sure that they are climate resilient. So that means, like, for example, this morning, I was very proud to be with the Minister of Health as we launched 3 mobile health units that are solar powered, that can go up into the hill countries of Sri Lanka, the hill countryside of Sri Lanka, and ensure that you know, those communities are served with these mobile health units that provide a whole range of services for women and girls in particular, and especially pregnant and lactating mothers. But it's also about prevention and making sure that we are advocating for women and girls, particularly around the issue of sexual and reproductive health, in many of the policies and the response strategies that are being put in place for climate. And that also means looking at the issue of governance around climate, because again, back to what we spoke about earlier, and no women in public policy making, it's the same when it comes to climate. We need women to have a stronger, more prominent voice at the table when it comes to climate solutions. And the final thing is really pushing hard for all partners, but particularly those involved in the financing of climate solutions, that they are putting in place gender sensitive, gender responsive budgeting, because then we have an equitable solution and response to this climate change reality that we're all facing. Otherwise, not only is it going to be a disaster because of the fact that climate change is real and it's having a terrible impact in so many communities, especially small island developing states, but we don't want that to be compounded by it further impacting women and girls in a very disproportionate way. So these are some of the ways in which UNFPA is working to help respond to the climate emergency, but also to put in place sustainable prevention mechanisms. Population
dynamics and development also play a significant role in Sri Lanka's recovery and sustainable development. How does the UNFPA support the government of Sri Lanka in addressing these challenges?
Great question. Thank you, Sonali. Population dynamics is an area that UNFPA has a long history in. And with the government of Sri Lanka, we're working hard with the Ministry for Data and Statistics to strengthen the national statistics system. And that's all about making sure that we have not only timely, accurate data, but that we're getting the right data that is going to inform in an evidence-based way policies and laws and response strategies that will favour all the people of Sri Lanka. And it's also about making sure that the data is used in the correct way, and that the different data systems that you have among different government entities, but also partners that work with government, that those data systems are able to speak to each other, for want of a better term, because otherwise the data can sit in silos and you don't have a response plan that is integrated and that is responding to the multifaceted needs that a government has to pay attention to. But this issue around population dynamics is something that here in the Asia Pacific region, UNFPA is advocating strongly that more attention is paid to these matters, because in Asia Pacific you have 13 countries with a fertility rate that is below the replacement level. You have 16 countries in Asia Pacific that are aged or will age in the next 3 to 4 years. Now, obviously, that puts a whole set of other issues on the government's plate, because suddenly the issues that they were dealing with take on a different tone. And what we want to do is to advocate that governments throughout the region, throughout the globe, when they're responding to these population shifts, that they do so in a way that is based on human rights, in a way that is, making sure that it responds to all of the population. There is no reason why a woman and her body should bear the brunt of a government's policy response to low fertility. That's not the answer. The answer is we need to start asking the right questions. It's not about numbers, it's about people. So why is it that young couple are really deliberating, can we afford to have children, and how many can we afford? Because the economic scenario in which they're living makes it very difficult for them. Perhaps there isn't enough daycare facilities, or they can't afford the daycare. Why is it that young woman who wants and sees her career progression in front of her, why is it that she feels she perhaps needs to put a pause on that? Because she is not sure whether or not having a child is going to be conducive for that career progression. There's a whole range of questions here that government need to ask, but they need to do so in a manner that is, human rights based, that is sensitive to the needs of all of society, and ultimately that doesn't discriminate against any particular group.
Pio, you have extensive experience in international relations and development. How do you see the role of youth empowerment in shaping Sri Lanka's future? What specific strategies does the UNFPA employ to empower young people in the country?
Well, you know, I was very lucky because I managed to go to Kilinochie in the north of the country and to attend a youth festival that we organised as UNFPA with some of our partners here in the country. And it was fantastic because, you know, we had hundreds of kids there from all over Sri Lanka coming together, and their focus was around, you know, discussing issues of diversity, of gender inclusion, and ultimately about, you know, how to break down some of these stereotypical gender norms that we see in society. And, you know, that plays a very important role also in terms of social cohesion, which is important in a setting like Sri Lanka also, and ultimately contributes towards the goal of, you know, achieving gender equality and the full empowerment of women. So youth are a really important vehicle for change in any country, and I think it's us and government and other partners working with youth in a respectful way, in a meaningful way. It shouldn't be tokenistic whenever we engage youth on some of these strategies that we're involved in. But it's also about looking at some of the broader systemic issues. So for example, if you take the area of science and technology, now this is an area where, you know, historically, women and girls have been underserved with respect to science and technology, because many of those involved in making the advances, and there have been amazing advances in these fields, as you know, but very often it is men. And so what we see are some of these advances that don't necessarily cater to women and girls and their particular needs. So I give you an example. It wasn't until a few years ago that the first crash test dummy was modelled on the body of a woman. A few years ago. So that means up until now you've had cars driving around with the airbag and the seatbelt mechanism in place that has been designed on a body like mine and not on a body like yours. So obviously that's wrong. And I'm not even now talking about, you know, having those things in place for pregnant women, which obviously takes additional research and whatnot. But, you know, it's not, there are many examples where you see that, you know, clinical trials, undiagnosed medical conditions, where there hasn't been enough inclusion of women in those arena, that has meant that the solutions aren't there yet for women and girls, or that the solutions in place aren't fully comprehensive in terms of their needs. And this is something that we need to change. But there's a bigger question here, which is, why is it that 16-year-old girl does not see herself in the field of science and technology? What is it about our curriculum, about our society, where she doesn't feel that that's an area that she should pursue in, where she's going to be able to thrive and live to her fullest potential and contribute to her country and her society? And that's why, you know, UNFPA is working with teachers and academia to see where are the points in a young adolescent's education where we can help change that narrative, where we can help inspire them. Now that takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of investment on the part of many partners, and that's why as UNFPA we're very pleased to be championing what we call our Equity 2030 Alliance, which is exactly about putting women and girls at the centre of science and technology in all its domains. And we're proud to work with governments, with private sector, with academia and many other partners. And I'm looking forward to seeing how we take it to scale.
Fabulous. My final question to you, Pio. Sri Lanka is currently in an IMF-supported program and is doing all it can to enable economic recovery. We also have an upcoming presidential election this year. We require a political culture that is geared towards citizen service, public interest. How important is it for Sri Lanka to have conscientious policymakers who hold themselves accountable to the people?
Well, my answer, Sonali, to you is not just relevant to Sri Lanka, it's relevant to every single country in the world. Those who work in public service, all of us, we have a sacred role when it comes to public service, because we are entrusted not only with taxpayers' money, but we're entrusted with making sure that we're creating a society that is equal and equitable for all. And that means not just women and girls, but also people with disabilities, the elderly, people with different sexual orientations, you name it, however vulnerable they may be. It's our responsibility to make sure that society caters for their needs and does so in a very meaningful way with the proper investments. So ethical policy making is key to that. And that's why it's really important that policymakers take that responsibility very seriously, that they are accountable for the work that they do. And I think that's where a constant dialogue with the public is very important. Consultation is always very beneficial, but it's not just for national policymakers. It's for institutions like mine at the United Nations. We cannot be here working in Sri Lanka if we're not accountable to the people we work with. And that's why one of my first duties here was to not meet with government, but it's to meet with the women and girls that we're supposed to serve. But it's many other partners in the media also have a very critical role in making sure that we're asking the right questions, we're holding the right people accountable for the work that they're doing and the policies that they're enacting, but also to make sure that you're giving a platform for all voices in Sri Lanka. That's really critical. And so, it takes many hands to lift this very heavy balloon of sustainable development and equitable progress for all, and all within the realm of fully respecting human rights for everybody. Because it's only when we do it together, holding hands as equal partners, that we can hope to achieve that measure of success.
Pio Smith, this has been most comprehensive. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for watching us. Good night.